All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms and homes around the world. We are so excited today because we are continuing our epic series with the Toronto Zoo. Over 15 amazing programs over the last 2 months, featuring everything from polar bears to tigers to tree kangaroos and so much more. We so appreciate you continuing to tune in. All right, we've got a whole bunch of notes to make before we dive in with our presentation topic today. Number one, in addition to our zoo programs we've been doing, we wanted to highlight a huge thing the zoo is doing this coming weekend. So for the long weekend, on 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time, both Saturday and Sunday, the zoo will be hosting a virtual campout. So you can join them around the campfire, do some great camping stories, learn about some of their animals, how you can get involved in conservation, and so much more. I really encourage you to do that, and I will be hosting from Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We look very forward to having you tune in. I will link all that information in the chat bar. Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, the next weekend, the 22nd through 24th, is doing our Global Biodiversity Festival, where we are working in support of 6 conservation organizations with over 40 programs over the week. I'll also link that in the chat bar. And last but not least, before we dive in, as with all our zoo programs, we are running a Slido chat today. So you can share questions in Slido, type in, upvote your favorite questions, and take part in some interactive polls and quizzes. The code today for our Slido program is BATS. And the reason it's bats, of course, is for our topic today. So we are joined live by Mary Ellen and Melissa at the Toronto Zoo. They may be closed, but animal care continues. And so they are going to showcase to us today the wonderful world of bats, why they're so important, some of the threats facing them, and what you can do at home to keep them around. Without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Melissa and Mary Ellen, and take us away.
Thank you so much, Jesse, and hello, everyone. My name is Melissa, and I work in the Hidden Zoo alongside a team of dedicated conservation biologists that work together to preserve Ontario's biodiversity through programs like Adopt-a-Bond, Turtle Island Conservation, Great Lakes Program, and I am a bat researcher with the Native Bat Conservation Program, where our mission is to conserve bats of Ontario, and we do this through scientific research to fill knowledge gaps, public outreach to build awareness, and knowledge sharing to maximize the impact of our efforts. So the way we study bats is we do through several mechanisms. We will put up acoustic monitors and listen to bats in the area. In the summertime, we will trap bats. So we'll go out and catch the bats in the forest. We will measure their forearms, take their weights, sex them, and we'll put little identifying individual band numbers on their forearms so that when we catch them again, we know who this bat is. And after we take all that information, we release them back into the wild. And we also do radio tracking studies at night where we follow the bats in the forest to see how they're moving around and what they are doing throughout the night. So you may be asking yourselves, why do bats matter? Why do we need to study bats? Well, you may not realize it, but bats are more important than we think. So a little bit about them. There are more than 1,400 species of bats in the world. So they are the second most diverse group that we have here on Earth, second only to mammals. So 1 out of every 5 mammals is going to be a bat species. And they are also the only mammal capable of true flight. So around the world, many species of bats act as pollinators, and they are known to pollinate more than 500 species of plants, including some of our favorite foods like bananas, mangoes, cashews, peaches, and agave, which is the main ingredient used to make tequila. And the tequila industry is $1 billion industry. So they do have an economic contribution with the ecological services they provide us. Also, fruit bats help with rainforest regeneration, and they do so through seed dispersal. So when they go, they eat their fruits, they fly over these big open fields, they poop out those seeds, and then those seeds effectively then grow into more fruit trees. So they do help with our forests, but they are also an organic solution to pest control, and they prevent the spread of disease, and they do so. So bats are a predator to mosquitoes, and mosquitoes can transmit diseases like malaria, dengue, yellow fever, and West Nile virus. They also reduce our need to rely on pesticides, and studies have shown that long-term exposure to pesticides can lead to chronic illnesses like cancers, Parkinson's, and birth defects, just to name some examples. But also, bats are primary predators to some of our agricultural pests, like corn earworm moths. and Colorado potato beetles, and if left unchecked, can cause a lot of damage to our agricultural crops, leading to reduced food for us and more money needed to help save those crops. So that brings us to the bats of Ontario here. All of our bats are insectivorous bats. We have 8 species, and unfortunately half of them are endangered, and that's because of the following threats. So our bats are facing habitat loss, urbanization, and fatalities due to wind turbine collisions and barotrauma, and also a disease called white nose syndrome, which was accidentally introduced into North America in 2006 and made its way to Ontario in 2010, where it decimated our hibernating bat population. So bats are facing several threats right now. So right now, bats have made their way out of hibernation and they are traveling to their summer roosts. Bats are capable of long distance flying, and they will often travel a few hundred kilometers between their winter sites and their summer sites. And where they typically stay in the summer is they will live in forests, particularly living in trees. So bats like to roost in old snags. They like to go under the bark. They like to live in tree cavities. So they will use forest and trees a lot in some way. But we also do have species of bats here that like to roost in buildings. But even if you do have bats that live in buildings, there's no reason to fear them because they are playing a role in controlling our biting insect population. But sometimes still people are on the fence about whether having bats in the building. And so what I like to say is it's okay for bats and people to share a building. But if you're having animals constantly go into your living space, like your living room, your kitchen, your bedroom, then you need to kind of find how they're getting in and prevent that access to the animals. So how can you help? You can help bats by keeping your gardens as natural as possible. Let the meadows grow, plant native plant species, and that will in turn bring insects to the gardens, which will then attract bats to your gardens. Also protecting wetlands. Bats like to forage a lot in wetlands. So if you do anything to protect that kind of habitat, you will protect bats along with a lot of other species that call the wetlands their home. But also avoid cutting down old snags. So I mentioned that bats do like to roost in dead, decaying old snags. I know this is not always possible due to safety reasons, but if you can leave them up, a lot of these little habitats do provide home for these species. But also another fun thing that you can do at home with your family is you can build a bat box. So over here, we have a single chambered bat box. It's heavier than it looks, but you can find instructions on how to make one on our website, www.torontozoo.com/bats, and you can download our conservation guide booklet. Like I mentioned, it's a fun activity to do with the family. It's just pretty much plywood, some mesh so that the bats have something to grip onto, screws, and wood glue. So bats like roosting in really small cavities, so that's why the chambers are only about half an inch deep. And one of the main questions that we get a lot is how do we increase the success of getting bats actually using our bat box? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to ask another question, and that's why are bats using bat boxes to begin with? So to understand that, we need to understand the ecology of bats. So why bats, how bats are interacting with their environment. And it turns out that there's differences between roost selection in males and roost selection in females. So I mentioned earlier that bats are the only mammal capable of true flight. Flying requires a lot of energy, particularly for a really small animal with high metabolism. So they need to find ways to counterbalance that energy. And they do so through a mechanism called torpor. So when they roost, they lower their body temperature to ambient temperature, and that effectively slows down their metabolism, and they save energy that way. So males will often seek out cooler roosts so that they counterbalance the energy of flight. Now females have to go through something that the males don't have to go through, and that's growing a baby. That requires a lot more energy than flying, and the female needs to keep her body warm in order for the baby to grow at a good rate. So she will often seek out warm roosts in order to carry on her pregnancy. But because temperature is always changing, these roosts are going to have changing temperatures as well. So it's very common for females to move and switch between roosts in order to get to the temperature that she wants to save as much energy as she can. So we are standing here right in front of the Americas Pavilion. And I'm sure many of you have been here before, but how many of you have actually noticed the bat boxes that we have up here? So we installed these bat boxes in 2018. They are 2 4-chambered bat boxes. Again, you can find instructions on how to make them in our conservation booklet on our website. And bats will only use bat boxes in the summertime. So it doesn't provide enough protection from our harsh winters for them to hibernate in them. So they will usually use them in the summertime, have their babies in them, and then leave in the fall to go back to hibernation. So now that we know a little bit more about why bats use bat boxes, the best way that we can increase our chances of actually having bats use the bat boxes is by building bigger bat boxes. So the bigger the box, the more variation of temperature you're going to have within that box. So the females have the option of moving around and not having to travel very far. Location is also important. So we recommend putting them south facing in the yard, but everybody's yard is different. So we recommend anywhere that receives 6 hours of sunlight, 6 hours of shade. And because we know bats do switch around roosts quite frequently, you may want to have several bat boxes and experiment with where you put them. Put them in all corners of your yard, because a lot of the times it's a guessing game, us trying to guess what we think the bats would like. And maybe what we think they like is completely opposite to what they actually do like. And some people paint their bat boxes, some people don't paint them. Again, it all depends on what your yard looks like. If you're primarily putting it up in a very shady area, then we recommend painting it a dark color. But make sure that the paint is non-toxic and it doesn't have too much of a strong smell, because that may keep some of your bats away. We also recommend putting the bats boxes on a height, just kind of like the one we have here in the Americas. It's about 3 to 5 meters off the ground on a pole. So we recommend either putting them on a pole or on the side of a building. And we don't usually recommend trees, because trees provide easy access for predators. And if branches grow the wrong way, they may cause too much clutter, and the bats may not be able to actually go in and out of the bat boxes very easily. So now that you've done all this, how do you check to see whether you've actually got bats in your bat box? Well, the first thing you could do is look down on the ground underneath your bat box. What you're looking for is guano, and guano is the fancy word for bat poop. So you're looking for these little brown pellets, and if you find these little brown pellets, congrats, you have had a bat use your bat box at some point in time, and that is a successful bat box. So the next thing that you can do is you can shine a red flashlight. So we recommend red light when looking into these bat boxes, and that's because it's not as abrasive to their eyes. And I like to think of it, say you're in a dark room and somebody suddenly uses flash photography. Just picture the blinding white light that suddenly hits you. It's the same with bats if they have flashlight shined right in their faces when they're in the dark corner. But the next best thing that you can do is some video cameras actually have night vision modes to them. So they have built-in little infrared light systems. So this is a light that we can't see and the bats can't see, but it will get picked up by your video camera. So you can look up into the bat box and see whether the video camera picks anything up. So now that you've done all that, and it turns out you've got bats, there's this really cool citizen science project called the Neighborhood Bat Watch that wants to know all about your bats in that bat box. So if you go to their website, www.batwatch.ca, it'll give you instructions on how to report that information. But not only that, they want to know how many bats you have in that bat box. And what you can do is you can count them as they fly out for the evening. and it's really important data because it helps monitor the distribution of bats across Canada. So we are going to bring it back to Jesse, who's going to show you these really cute videos of some bats that I took up at my dad's place with bat boxes that he has there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for an awesome presentation so far. And yeah, let me just share my screen and bring up a bat box for you guys. And we will show you this awesome bat video. All right, there we are. Oh. Perfect.
Yeah, so can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so what you're seeing here are some of the two most common species that you will actually find using the bat boxes. On the right is our bigger species, the big brown bat, and on the left is our little brown myotis. So our big brown bat is one of the larger bats, he's on the right, larger bats that we have here in Ontario. So they eat larger prey, like bigger moths, beetles, and also June bugs. They will eat, oh, he just flew away. Oh, there's another one. They will eat their body weight in insects every single night. Now, the little guy you see on the left used to be Ontario's most common bat species, but unfortunately now they are endangered because of the fungus called white nose, or the disease called white nose syndrome. But we are fine, and this is a fungus that affects our hibernating bats. And unfortunately, our population lost 92% of our bats since the introduction of this fungus. But thankfully, we are starting to see that there's more animals surviving the winter time, and which shows that there's potentially a natural resistance forming. So hopefully, we'll see more of the the population will be able to grow again. So what these guys did. So I mentioned that this is all my dad's property. When they emerged, they pretty much stayed in the garden. So they were flying, they were eating our biting insects that we had in the garden. So that's one of the advantages of having a bat box. So how did I know they were flying in our gardens? Well, I could see them do it, but also one thing that I can use is a bat detector. So if you bring it back over here for a second, I've got a little device that so bats navigate the dark at night using sound through a technique called echolocation. And this sound we can't hear because they produce it at a high frequency that is above our human hearing. So we need these little devices. This one you could just plug right into your phone and it'll convert that sound into a sound that humans can hear. And it let me see what the bats were doing kind of throughout the night. So they were helping control my dad's insect population. So I don't know if you've noticed one thing about the video when I was talking there is that they groomed a lot. Bats are in fact very clean animals, and a lot of the time, like 30 minutes before emerging from the roost, they'll scratch, they'll lick their wings, and they'll just continuously groom. And that's because they want to make themselves as streamlined and aerodynamic as possible in order to save some energy when it comes to flying. So just to finish off here, we've just kind of walked over to one of the main pieces of equipment that the native bat conservation uses in our field studies. So this is a passive acoustic detector. We put these up in the springtime and we will leave them up until the fall, sometimes even as late as December, and it will record bats as they fly by at night. We program it to start automatically recording 30 minutes before sunset and 30 minutes after sunrise. And this is a very easy way of collecting a lot of data. So what this will tell us, it'll tell us what species are in the area and approximately at what time of year they're in the area. Unfortunately, it won't tell us how many animals we have, because we have no idea to tell whether we have one bat flying around the microscope, the microphone 100 times, or whether we have 100 bats flying back the microphone once. So that's one of the limitations of acoustic work. So we will come back, we will leave this up for a few weeks, and we'll come back at a later time with another episode of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants and analyze the data that this passive detector recorded. So to finish off here, one thing that you guys can do to protect bats is protect their habitat. So we did talk about some threats that bats face here in Ontario, including habitat loss, white nose syndrome, and wind turbine fatalities. But one threat we haven't really mentioned, and it's one that people don't really think about, is public opinion. So somebody a really, really, really long time ago decided that we should associate bats with the devil, with evil, with diseases, and that message has been carried on generation through things like superstition, folklore, pop culture, and even social media. And the problem is these negative images and these negative words, which incite fear in people, can lead to the persecution of these animals, including destroying roosts and including killing them. So I say it's the 21st century. It's time that we paint a new light, a new image in bats, that it's time we stop vilifying them and start highlighting some of the ecological goods that they do provide humans and this planet. And this is how you can help. You can help by educating others about the importance of bats. So I mentioned tequila industry is $1 billion industry, but if you look at our import and exports of fruits and vegetables, that's also several $1 billion industry right there. So our bats do provide, do help our economy. Do help our economy, but also if because we want to paint new images, we wanted to start with the next generation. So if we have any kids online here who want to paint some pictures of bats and tell us why they like bats, we would love to see those. And you could send those to our email address at bats@torontozoo.ca. I want to thank you so much for having me here today. If you want to learn more about the Bat Conservation Program, you can visit our website. We also have a video diary series called Bat Diaries, which you can find on the Toronto Zoo YouTube page. And if we don't have time to get to your question here today, we also recently did a Q&A session on the Toronto Zoo's Instagram page, and you can find that there at the Toronto Zoo. So thank you again, and I'd love to hear your questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for an awesome presentation. Again, we've been really inspired by bats. The comments coming through on YouTube are great. Slido questions are awesome. So a few quick notes. One, for everyone who is on Slido, first of all, great questions. I'm going to start the quiz in just a minute, so get ready. We got 10 participants for that, which is awesome. We're going to alternate between YouTube, Slido, and our live groups joining us in Michigan and Ontario today for questions. So I'm really looking forward to all your queries. And a note, this is something that's come up a lot on YouTube, is a lot of people didn't know there were bats in Ontario to begin with. And so a few quick notes on that. Go outside, get to parks, go at night. You will see bats pretty much guaranteed. In Toronto, High Park, Rouge Park, all filled with bats. And join the Toronto Zoo for their virtual campout, like I said already. So this coming weekend, a virtual campout. Yesterday when we were testing, there were bats flying around at night. There will probably be when we do it on the weekend as well. All right, I want to start with a great question from Peyton on Slido. So they have a bat box, and they took it down because there was a wasp nest in it and 2 bats on top of it. Can wasps harm the bats? Like, is a bat box something that you need to be cognizant of other animals living in it, or will the bats just deal with that themselves?
So it's very common for wasps to actually make nests inside bat boxes, but for the most part, they will keep separate. So as long as the bats are not annoying the wasps, they are capable of living in harmony together.
Fantastic.
But if you do want to clean out the wasp nest, like I mentioned earlier, bats do only use it in the summertime, so you could always take it down in the fall or early winter, clean it out, and then put it back up in it. They should be okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Melissa. All right, our second question from Slido, actually from YouTube, Mr. Prezio's group in Thunder Bay, they want to know, do bat boxes need to be near a source of water for the bats to survive there? Like, do you need to be cognizant of where they're putting them up compared to streams or lakes or anything like that?
Well, bats, they do like to forage around water sources, but they are also capable of traveling long distances. So our little brown, the little brown myotis that we had in my dad's bat box are capable of traveling 7 kilometers to forage every single night. So if you do have a water source, they will travel there. For the most part, it doesn't necessarily have to be near water, as long as they can access water from where you are. And Ontario does seem to have a lot of watersheds and streams. So you should be okay.
Fantastic. All right. I love these bat box specific questions that so many people want to put them up or have them up already. That's awesome,
I
guys.
know.
All right. I'm going to go to Lisa joining us in Spring Arbor in Michigan. So Lisa, if you have a question for us, go for it.
I do have a question from one of my kids. Her name's Nora, and she wants to know if bats give birth upside down.
They do, actually. So that's what makes them super moms. So not only do they have to carry a baby, and often this time this baby is going to weigh about 30% of the mother's body weight. So that's like a human giving birth to a 40 or 50-pound baby. She's got to fly with that, but also she has to give birth upside down. So yes, they are definitely super moms.
Awesome. And let's never think of the 40 to 50-pound baby ever again. All right. Thanks, Lisa, for the great question. Quick note before I go to Mr. Hill in Keswick, Ontario. Ryan was the best on our quiz for Slido today. Way to go, man. And congrats for getting that in first place. All right, Mr. Hill, if you have a question for us from your class, go for it.
Yes, thanks, Jesse. Mason in grade 5 wants to know if the Toronto Zoo takes in injured bats and nurses them back to health.
So we don't actually take in wildlife here, but we do have an excellent wildlife rehabilitation center called Toronto Wildlife Center. That is pretty much the hospital for all wildlife in the Greater Toronto area. So do check out their website. They have really great instructions on what to do if you come across a sick and injured animal. And it's also really important to remember, if you do come across a sick and injured animal, that you don't touch it because they will react in self-defense and potentially bite you. So it's always important to get an adult and have them call your local wildlife rehabilitation center.
Fantastic. Thanks, Melissa. All right. Andreas on Slido, who always seems to ask the question that gets the most votes for it, is how can we help bats with white nose syndrome? So this is something you mentioned and is a serious threat to bats. What can people do to help mitigate this?
So in terms of the public, by staying out of caves, because that's usually where the fungus likes to live. When bat researchers do work in caves, they usually wear a Tyvek suit, which then they take off. It's a one-use Tyvek suit, and that's in order to prevent the spread of this fungus. So staying out of caves. And besides that, there's not really a lot that the public can do. There is a lot of research going towards this on how to help bats survive the winter. And there's this really fun project called Operation Fat Bat, where they are putting up UV lights to help draw in insects to one particular area and essentially creating a smorgasbord for these bats. And so it helps them put on weight. And then when they go into hibernation, if they do arouse a little bit more frequently than normally because they're itching the fungus off of their wings, then they have a little bit more fat stores that could potentially travel through. Right now, I know that there are studies looking into potentially adding supplements to bat boxes. So white nose syndrome is actually something that only affects them during hibernation. Once they come out of it in the summertime, they completely groom it off and they don't have it anymore. So during this period, some researchers are thinking, well, maybe bat boxes, we can provide some kind of supplement that gets on their skin and helps them survive the winter a little bit more. But there's a lot of factors that need to be thought about because we want to make sure that we don't accidentally disturb the balance of the natural microbiota. If that helps answer the question.
No, that's a perfect answer. And it's funny, it's the second presentation today where someone has mentioned the fact that we could, influence the diseases of other animals. A lot of people sort of assume, especially lately, animals are the ones giving us diseases, and that works both ways. So just be cognizant of when you're interacting with wildlife in any fashion, and that will help go a long way to making sure these populations and species are healthy. Fantastic. All right, I'm going to go back to our live groups, and then I'll take a few more from Slido as well. So Lisa, if you want to come back, Ms. Morrison, go for it.
Let's see. So one of my students, Rachel, wants to know how bats communicate. I know they use echolocation when they're flying around, but do they use that to communicate with each other?
They do. So bats do actually, they vocalize through ultrasound that we can't hear, but they also make audible calls and chirps. And researchers have done a lot of studies between them. And it turns out that bats do have a very large vocabulary and even names for each other. and accents. So it's a language we don't understand, but they definitely understand. And if you think about some species where there's like millions of bats living in the same cave, mothers need to be able to recognize her pups, and they will do so by having individual calls for each other.
The accent part of that is the best. I'm thinking like Scottish Batman, and it makes me very happy. All right, I'm going to go back to Mr. Hill and then take a few more online. Mr. Hill, do you have another question for us? Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I don't know why she wants to know this, but grade 6 Zoe wants to know if bats shed their fur and if they have a summer coat and a colder weather coat.
That's a really cool.
Yeah,
So
cool
bats
question.
do actually molt, but they don't go through different color changes as you would expect for like a hare or a rabbit. But they will shed their fur at certain times of the year, particularly pups that are growing into adulthood. They'll lose the puppy fur and get their kind of more sheen adult fur to them.
Yeah, very cool question. I like that one. We've never had that for a bat program before.
Yeah, no, that was a new one for me too.
All right. So we're going to take a few more bat questions, but Melissa, I have to derail this for a second, and it's totally Mary Ellen's fault because all 2 months we've been talking about the baby giraffe, and so then it's been relentlessly promoted on social media, so people want to know how the baby giraffe is doing. You have to let us know.
The baby giraffe is doing really well. I was very excited about this news as well. We have a little girl, and apparently she pretty much instantly got up after she was born, and as my coworker put it, has accomplished so much in just her day of life, including being able to walk on those really tall legs. So how many newborn babies can do that within 24 hours of their life?
I don't know. Maybe the 40-pound ones could, but we'll cover that in another program. All right. Thank you so much for that. So Peyton wants to know, when did you first decide that you wanted to research bats? Like, why are you so interested personally in all this?
It comes down to childhood experience. So I'm going to share a personal story. So it comes down to seeing the bats flying around at my dad's cottage, and it was absolutely the most fascinating thing in the world. There's these little things flying around in the sky at night, and then one day one of these actually got into my bedroom, and I was really excited. I was like, Mom, Dad, come look at the bat that we have in my room. And they completely freaked out. So there's a little 6-year-old me watching a couple of adults run around, just chickens running around the bedroom, just freaking out about this tiny little animal. And so my dad finally got a margarine container, trapped this little animal. And here I thought he's just gonna open the door and let it go. But in his panic, he ended up flushing it down the toilet. And that impression stayed with me that entire time. It's just like, why would that happen? And so because of that impression, it just made me think about bats. And when I finally was able to kind of go out into the jungle and see a real bat cave for the first time, I knew then and there, this is what I want to do. But happy story now is like, because of what I do, I've been able to educate my dad about the importance of bats. And now he's got 3 bat boxes in his yard, and he now lets bats go.
That's awesome. Well, from tragic beginnings come a beautiful story, and that's really, thank you so much for that, Melissa. That's really heartening and something that we haven't had in any of these programs yet, so I really appreciate you telling us all that.
Oh, no worries. It shaped my life.
It did, and we're so thrilled to have you here today. This has been so great. I'm so excited. And by the way, so Melissa had mentioned we are doing a second bat conservation program in the coming weeks, so do check for that. And obviously we'll be posting it and sharing it on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We hope to have everyone back and even more. All right, we have so many good questions that I can't even possibly get them all. So I'm going to try and get a few more here, and we'll see what we can do. Genevieve in Oshawa, also having joined us for all our programs at the Toronto Zoo. She wants to know, how do the bats at the zoo exercise?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so how do the bats at the zoo exercise? So the bats that you have in some of your enclosures, and we know that they're out there, do they exercise in any way?
So we do have straw-colored fruit bats, and the enclosure that they're in does provide them enough room for them to fly. But a lot of times too, is that they'll hang from their perches, and then they'll just kind of flap their wings, and they get exercise that way. So they do have enough room to fly around in there.
Yeah, super cool. If you ever get, when the zoo reopens and people that are in the general Toronto area get a chance to go, you'll see bats doing that really regularly in their cages. It's really cool. All right, I'm gonna try and take a question from every one of our people that come to all our sessions. So good luck, let's do this, rapid fire. Ryan wants to know, do bats really suck blood or is it just a theory?
So they don't actually suck blood. So we have 1,400 species of bats, but 3 of those bats are actually true vampire bats. So there are species of bats that do have a completely blood diet, but again, they don't do so by sucking blood. They have very sharp incisors, and what they do is they make a little cut on the cow usually, and because of an anticoagulant or a chemical in their saliva, which prevents blood from clotting, this allows the blood to flow very freely, and essentially the bats just lap it up like kitten lapping milk.
That is an interesting analogy. I like it. Very fun. Awesome. All right, let's take a question from Juliet in Oshawa, and I'm surprised it took this long to get this question. Are bats dangerous to people?
So no, bats are not dangerous to people. We have been living alongside bats for a very long time. If you think about our times in the caves and I think about bats sharing buildings with people, but they are wild animals, and mammals in particular can carry viruses that transmit to people when we get bitten. And this particular virus I'm talking about is rabies virus. So this is why it's really important that when you come across any kind of wildlife, that you don't handle it. And this goes for like when you travel abroad, try not to pet street dogs and street cats, because we feel very safe here in North America because we have vaccination programs for our pets. This is not necessarily true when we travel abroad. So just handling any kind of unfamiliar animals, we don't recommend doing so unless you have been properly trained. And also we have, working with wildlife, we also have vaccinations that help protect us from those zoonotic diseases as well. So very important to appreciate nature from a distance.
Yeah, fantastic. So sort of, I guess, a segue on that note, Harriet, who's joined us for all our programs, has a bunch of great questions, but one sort of ties into what you were just talking about really nicely, and that is, if you find a bat that's hit a screen door or hit a window and it's injured, is there something you should do with it? Should you is there a way to safely transport it, or do you call someone? You mentioned the Toronto Wildlife Center earlier for Toronto bats, but anything you can recommend?
If there's a way to open up the door and just let the bat go out on its own, but we do recommend calling a local wildlife rehabilitation center. They just may be roosting there for the day, but if you find that they've been there for a few nights, then they've managed to get themselves stuck somehow. And usually it's the new babies that are learning to fly that end up finding themselves in weird situations. So if you can find a way of being able to help the animal without physically touching them, then that's the way to go. But if it's completely unavoidable, then we recommend like thick gloves or a towel, and try and see if you can kind of scoop the animal out that way. But
Fantastic.
Calling the experts is better.
Always. Melissa, this has been amazing. And so what I want to wrap up with is for people at home who want to learn more about bats, whether at the Toronto Zoo or generally, where are some resources and places we can send them?
So the resources, you can go to Zoo School to You, where we've posted up some of our websites over there, but also our website, torontozoo.com/bats, tells us all about the native bat conservation program. But there's also a lot of amazing bat conservation organizations out there. So things like Merlin Tuttle Bat Conservation International, Bat Conservation Trust has a lot of amazing resources alongside our website. So feel free to check those out. There's no one shop stop all.
We have shared most of those, if not all of those, in our YouTube chat bar, so you can check those out. We will share them with our live teachers as well. And Melissa, what I want to do now is just say a huge appreciation for your fantastic presentation today, and to encourage everyone tuning in to check out our second bat conservation program coming soon, and the virtual campout at the Toronto Zoo. I can't stress this enough. This weekend, we're going to be doing 1 hour each day. Really, really cool virtual campout programs. We encourage you to join us 7:45 Eastern, both Saturday and Sunday. All right, what we do at the end of every program is I'm going to demute our 2 teachers. So Mr. Hill, Ms. Morrison, if you could join me in saying a big thank you to Melissa for joining us today. You are both demuted. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. We look very forward to seeing you soon. And Melissa, thanks again. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye for now, everyone.